This is Pixelated Audio, episode 105, and today we're listening to the music from Illusion City.
All right, welcome back to the video game music and retro gaming podcast, Pixelated Audio. We're your hosts. I'm Brian. This is Gene, and we've got an amazing soundtrack to dive into today.
That's right. We're covering Illusion City that came out on the MSX Turbo. It's a fantastic soundtrack, as you've already heard, and we've got a ton of great music coming up.
Yeah, I'm excited. You know, you were the one that kind of brought this to my attention. You're like, we should really talk about Illusion City. And, I'm familiar with the soundtrack, but I didn't know much about the game. So as we kind of dive into some of the details, you're going to find out that this game doesn't only have an amazing soundtrack, it's an amazing game as well, and it's really revolutionary for the time, especially on the MSX Turbo R. And so I think we're going to have a lot of fun today. That first track that brought us in, that was Illusion City Theme A. Fantastic track. You can't start off an episode without coming in like that.
Oh, yeah, that one just hits you hard, and just right away you can tell that this is going to be a pretty epic game.
Yeah. That low kind of oscillating deep bass note that just kind of like swells and decrescendos into this like cesspool of like amazing notes is probably what sparked my interest in the soundtrack to begin with. Yeah. I think this really speaks for the soundtrack.
Every time I hear this track, it just gets me so pumped. And it has this really classic composition technique where there's this kind of synth line that's going on, and it never lands right on the downbeat. You got something that's just sort of keeping the energy up. You got this syncopation, and it goes throughout the entire track, and it's just like puts you at this, makes you a little bit tense, a little bit on edge, and it works so well to set up the game. Yeah,
I think what does this for me too is in the background you get these like kind of like rising and falling notes. It's like goes all the way back down, but it's just in the background. It's very subtle, and I think that adds the dramatic effect to the track even more. And so I had a lot of fun listening to this, and I was surprised hearing it on the MSX. I'm like, what? Are you kidding me? This is like FM Pack or something like that. And sure enough, yeah, it's using some expansion hardware, but I think it really embodies like some of the best audio you're going to hear on the system.
Yeah, this whole game was introduced to me in a few different ways, actually. People say, oh, the music from this game is really great, you got to listen to it. And obviously it was great, But I decided, why don't we just check into the whole game instead of just playing a track and like an expansion pack? And sure enough, the whole thing is just packed to the brim with great tracks.
Right. And little did we know there was like a million releases of this game. And so we got a lot of stuff to go through. We're going to mostly stick to the MSX music. Why? Because I think first of all, this game deserves its spotlight on the MSX. It was originally released for the MSX, and I think this is a great soundtrack to kind of like put the system in a spotlight, you know?
Yeah, it'll be interesting to compare to the other ones, but this is definitely the centerpiece here is the MSX release. The other ones have some changes and variations, but this is kind of the one that set the stage for all the other ones.
Right. So Illusion City, or Genei Toshi, is a cyberpunk turn-based RPG originally released in 1991, spanning across 8 floppy disks for about $100 when it came out. It's, you know, it's a lot of money to drop on a game, you know, back then.
RPGs back in the day, man.
Yeah, and I mean, this is 1991, so, you know, with the you know, inflation and stuff like that, this is a sizable chunk of change, you know?
Yeah.
Anyway, so it was originally released for the MSX Turbo R and then ported in 1992 and 1993 for the FM Towns, the PC 98, and also had compatibility for PC 88, the Sharp X68000, and the Sega CD, or rather the Mega CD. It was both developed and published by a fairly small company called Microcabin.
That's right. You might remember Microcabin as creating the Zack series. That's probably the one they're most well known for.
Right.
So originally, Microcabin was a personal computer shop started in November of 1981 in the Mie Prefecture. A year later, they became incorporated and started producing games. Microcabin developed games throughout most of the 80s, and starting with early games like Mystery House and the sequel Mystery House 2, which were inspired, but not exactly the same as the ones created by Sierra. But the similarities aren't that superficial. It was pretty much a straight-up rip-off until they started developing their own original series.
Right.
So they made adaptations of Meison Ikoku, Urusei Yatsura. So yeah, they made the Zack series of games and the spin-off from the Zack games, which is called the Phrase series. There's about 3 or 4 games there.
Right.
Elm Knight, Guardian War, Lucien's Quest, both of those on the 3DO. Riglord Saga 1 and 2, which we might know here as Blazing Heroes, and the Marionette Company games for the Dreamcast and PlayStation, and of course, Illusion City.
Right.
So starting in the 2000s, they began to develop pachinko software.
Sounds like a lot of other companies.
Yeah,
a lot of other companies, small companies, you know, that pachinko is where the money's at. Still where the money's at.
Yeah, I know. Like, right, Konami, that's like their bread and butter these days.
Yeah, well, they're making bank, you know, off these poor saps who are just sitting all day in the pachinko parlors, but, you know.
Well, it's either that or loot boxes and, you know, freemium games. It's kind of one or the other, you know.
True. Or horrible, like, more mobile experiences or something.
Yeah, well, everybody's doing a bit of that, so. Anyway, in 2008, they were acquired by AQ Interactive and became a wholly owned subsidiary of the company, although they are still operating today as a subsidiary company.
Yeah, so the main sound staff of Microcabin were Tadahiro Nitta, Yukiharu Urita, and Yasufumi Fukuda, who also moved on to Chunsoft or Spike Chunsoft. And there was also Ryuji Sasai, who wasn't involved in this soundtrack, but 3 out of those 4 guys were responsible for creating this the soundtrack that we're listening to today. So the game was completely programmed by Microcabin, but for the Mega CD, they had some help porting the code over by AISYSTEM Tokyo. And we'll talk about AISYSTEM Tokyo in a bit, but first let's dive into some more music. What do we got next?
So we started with Illusion Theme A, and now we're going to play Illusion Theme B. So if you load the MSX version up right now on disc 1, you get this menu with a couple of options. First thing you do, you can see this really actually pretty awesome intro. It's non-interactive. Start out on this big airship flying over, and it kind of gets into the background of the game right before you actually start. And you actually have to switch over to disc 2 to start the actual game. So it's like a really massive intro. So this is the music that plays during that cutscene. So Illusion Theme B from the MSX version of Illusion City.
that was Illusion Theme B, composed by Yukiharu Urita for the MSX Turbo R.
It's not quite as punchy as the other one, but you just you sit with it and you get goosebumps as it goes on. It's just it just grows and grows as the song goes on.
Well, it's a lot more cinematic, and I know there's some kind of debate, right, between which version should have been the intro and which, and this was chosen. It's theme B, but it was chosen for the intro of the game. I'm kind of on the fence. First off, the soundtrack in its entirety is amazing. Both of these themes really could be, in that intro sequence. And I think, like I said, either way, I could go either way. Like, I'm hearing it now, and now I'm picturing that kind of cinematic beginning or that cinematic intro. And I'm like, oh yeah, this just fits. But when I listen to theme A, I'm like, man, they should use this one.
It's a matter of preference. I mean, the one
totally
has a little bit different of an energy. It's a little bit more high intensity for that theme A, whereas theme B is definitely a little bit moodier. It really doesn't develop quite as quickly as the other one, but they both set a scene for sure.
Yeah. All right, so we talked about the three composers that were responsible for Illusion City, and all three composers on Illusion City became quite well known after the soundtrack, and it was highly regarded when it was released. So Tadahiro Nitta, he was one of the original founding members of Microcabin. He became the central figure of sound at the company, and from the 80s until the 2000s, he was responsible for a lot of the PC and home console titles. So some of his work include Frey in the Magical Adventure, also Frey in Magical Adventure, the CD release, Final Fantasy I for the MSX. And that was awesome because the soundtrack is really solid.
Yeah, it's one of the only times Final Fantasy was released for a competing system at the time. So,
right.
People have some opinions about it, but in general, a lot of people really like the soundtrack for it. It's a little bit richer than the NES one in some ways. It's just a different kind of approach to it, and I've really enjoyed everything I've heard of it.
Yeah, the Wonder Swan version is actually really good too.
Yes.
Yeah, I like that one. He also did Elm Knight and Lucien's Quest with Fukuda, Zack 1 and 2, Sword and Sorcery, and Shenmue. And he's currently using the name Nitta Mikan. Not sure why, but Mikan is usually like a Mikan, man, I'm trying to think of the English word now. It's a tangerine.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, Mikan. And he's doing some live performances, actually. He's using have you heard of a shakuhachi?
I probably.
It's an old, it's kind of like a old Japanese flute instrument. Actually, I have a sample if you want to hear it.
Oh, yeah, sure. Yeah, I think I know what you're talking about.
Here, let's just listen to this sample so everybody knows what we're talking about here. Really eerie.
Oh yeah,
it's got that nice mysterious vibe to it.
I could definitely hear the rose or the cherry blossoms fluttering in the background.
Yeah, he's also working as a musician using the violin. So he's a all-around game composer and performer as well. And then Yasufumi Fukuda, I got some notes on him.
Yeah, he was one of the main composers for Riglord Saga 2, the sequel to Blazing Heroes on the Saturn, which he also performed guitar for that on the soundtrack. But in general, he's probably best known as a support composer, but he's been involved in a lot of titles you've probably heard of. So some of those include Innocent Life, a futuristic Harvest Moon with Delphi sound, Harvest Moon Animal Parade, Ace Attorney Investigations, Miles Edgeworth, King of Fighters 2002 Ultimate Match. He did a few arrangements on Smash Brothers Brawl.
Along with everybody else.
Oh, I mean, sure, yeah. But he's still pretty active in the industry today. Sonic Generations, and Mario and Sonic at the London 2012 Olympic Games.
Awesome. And then we have Urita, who went on to become a member of Taito's Zuntata band for a time.
Right, yeah. He composed quite a number of games, including Zack 3, Guardian War, Blazing Heroes, also known as Riglord Saga, or possibly Mystaria, The Realms of Lore. Maybe you've heard it in, a different region. He was responsible for the first Battle Gear arcade game, which went on to be a series of these sort of arcade racers with really high energy soundtracks, Bust-A-Move 3, and Naval Ops Warship Gunner, as well as composing the Mega CD arrangements of the battle themes for Illusion City.
Yeah, and we also need to give credit to Hiroshi Yamada. He was responsible for the driver of Illusion City, which is, we owe a lot of credit to the driver. I mean, that's what's creating the sound. That's what the composers are working with. And so leaving him out would be a disservice, I think. But this guy is a beast. He's been all over the place. He's been doing drivers for Frey, Zack 3, Meisen Ikoku. He was a programmer for all 3 of the Zack games, including Guardian War, Shenmue, and the recent re-release of Shenmue 1 and 2.
Yeah, that's right. The one that just came out a few months ago. So he's still in the game.
He's still in the game. He's doing, he's credited as a producer in some situations. I think translator. And
yeah, he's sort of just all around, very, very heavy in the tool chain, but, can jump around to almost any part of the product, it sounds like, which is awesome. And, we got to say, like, we're really fortunate because we not only have the information about the people who wrote the drivers, but the individual composers for all of the songs, which, as you know, when you go back to games, it's not always easy to find out who wrote each track.
Right. So that being said, let's get into some more music. This next track is called Indoor Combat, and it was composed by Tadahiro Nitta for Illusion City on the MSX.
That was Indoor Combat, composed by Tadahiro Nitta for Illusion City.
This is another really funky little track. Actually, I didn't think it would be this mellow. When I first, you see Indoor Combat, you're thinking, okay, this is going to be like some fight track or something like that. It's going to be very high intensity battle music. Not really the case. It's a lot more subdued, and it has this almost kind of like dance to it.
Yeah, something that's interesting, and what's really cool is all of the composers very clearly work together, because you'll have different composers that write music that kind of sounds like it fits in the same mood. So they're, I'm just speculating here, but this is one of the tracks, I know this for sure, this is one of the tracks that plays when you're walking around one of these combat zones, like, like a dungeon or whatever. But I was kind of assuming that, all of the dungeon themes are probably written by the same person, and all of the battle themes are written by... No, they just kind of split it up evenly, but they fit very closely with each other. So there are a lot of ones that have this sort of like grooving kind of thing as you're walking around in these areas where you're running into random battles, but none of them are written by the same person necessarily. So it's just kind of like a mood they were going for.
Well, it's interesting because, you're right. It's not just like all these soundtracks or all these tracks sound disjointed from each other because they were written by different people. They really kind of decided on a central theme and stuck with it. And not necessarily a theme, like a thematic kind of thing, but more of like an overall feeling, and it kind of retains throughout each track that we listen to. It's got that same kind of, kind of noir steampunk kind of sound to it, or cyberpunk,
steampunk. It's kind of a, well, I wouldn't say it's mostly cyberpunk, but it's a little bit like, retro.
Right. Well, steampunk just kind of came out, but it's kind of retro because it's for the time period too.
Yeah,
it kind of looks retro that way, but this track is really fun to listen to, and I think that as we kind of get through more of the tracks too, you're going to see that theme or that feeling, that vibe is retained throughout. It's all like a bunch of puzzle pieces all kind of connected together. Yeah,
I think they did a really good job working together to have a really cohesive sound throughout the soundtrack.
Yeah. So let's talk about the story a little bit. Gene, what do you got?
Oh, there's a lot to go through here. I'll try to get through it without spoiling too much of the game. So, it's the early 21st century, and the Asian continent is devastated by an unknown disaster, with Hong Kong being the most affected.
And we're all safe here in the U.S.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Now, this time has already passed, so it's one of these things where the future is literally like right now, but, it was 25 years ago. So anyway, disease and destruction affect the city, and it leaves it as a shadow of itself. 20 years later, people come back to find that the city is still there, but there's also a new Hong Kong built on top of it under the rule of a mysterious corporation known as SIVA, S-I-V-A. The new order says that Hong Kong, or Neo-Hong Kong, is to be an independent state, and the People's Republic of China and the UK sign an agreement in which they both renounce their claims over the city. So that's just sort of the background. That's what you see in that initial cutscene.
Right.
Shortly after that, when you start the game, you see that there are these two sisters, Homei and Xiaomei, who are being chased by agents of the new regime. Xiaomei gets captured, and we're not exactly sure why right away, but Homei is able to escape. She's rescued and brought to the home of the main protagonist, Tianren, who is a diver or a hunter who lives in the new Hong Kong, together with his partner Mei Hong. The two travel through the city gathering information and unraveling the mystery of the SIVA Corporation and their plans to bring forth some sort of dangerous powers.
Yeah, so there's a lot going on there, right? So basically, in a nutshell, Hong Kong is wiped out, and this kind of evil force comes in, and nobody hears from anything again. And, the city's just kind of wiped off the map for a little while.
Right.
20 years later, wow, it's there. And now it's Neo-Hong Kong, and it's declared an independent state. So you start the story in Neo-Hong Kong, and this is where everything takes place in the game. And so from here on out, everything, your surroundings, everything all takes place in the city.
Yeah, although you do travel to the older parts of the city as the game progresses. And, there's an outer shell and an inner shell, essentially. So the outer shell is the new city, and the inner shell is the old city. So you're kind of going into the sewers and, the piping just to find out what's going on. It gets deeper and more more menacing as time goes on. So astute gamers will recognize that this is pretty much the same plot as everybody's favorite JRPG. Tale of Games presents Chef Boyardee's Barkley Shut Up and Jam Guide in Chapter 1 of the Hoops Barkley Saga. We've got a post-cyberpocalypse. Neo-New York is built on the remains of New York after it's destroyed in the tragic cataclysm caused by Charles Barkley's Chaos Dunk.
Yeah.
So sad.
Yeah, this is a spitting image. It's I would say they might have just ripped it off.
I'm sure they did exactly, because the game is clearly a parody, but
right.
I couldn't not bring that up because that game is so ridiculous. I laughed out loud the first time I read that description.
Yeah, I remember you text me that, and I was like, oh my god, that's so funny. Like, you're right, it's the same game. But yeah, there's a bunch of characters in this game. It's kind of plays out like a melodrama, right? There's a lot of different characters kind of coming in and out of your party. They come in when they're needed in the story, and they, kind of leave when they're no longer kind of the central focus. So your main character is Tianren, and he is a diver. There's Mei Hong, also known as Mei Fang. This is Tianren's longtime partner and another kind of main character of the game, another protagonist. Yeah. There's Homei, the girl that the authorities want to get back. Xiaomei, Homei's twin sister that was captured. Lao Shi, which is Tianren's master. Shu Doshi and Shu Wan, adopted father of Mei Fang. And the Clan of Eight, which is a bunch of bosses, right? It's like
so essentially there's a cabal of evil lords who are controlling the city, and you're tasked with essentially taking them out.
Right,
you know,
right.
Of course.
So the Clan of Eight, or the Evil Eight. I forgot, how did they say it in the game?
I've seen it in the pseudo-English translation as the Motian 8, but I don't know exactly what that translates to.
Right, it's just the Hachibushu, right? So,
yeah, it's
the 8-man clan or whatever. Yeah.
Exactly, and you led actually by a 9th final boss kind of thing. You know,
right,
how
right.
these things go.
Yeah, you know. Yeah. And you notice all the names are Chinese names, right? None of them are in Japanese. Even the Japanese pronunciation, if you're trying to read them, it can be interpreted several ways because it's not really standard. It's not a standard name, right?
Mm-hmm,
so it's kind of however you want to interpret the names. But I think that we're talking about the city and kind of getting devastated. Let's get into another track called Noises of the City. This is composed by Yasufumi Fukuda for Illusion City on the MSX.
That's right. That was Noises of the City, composed by Yasufumi Fukuda for Illusion City.
I can't help but sing it the whole way through.
Oh, man. It plays when you're walking around the town, and I think it's like a pretty aggressive town theme, actually.
Yeah, totally. And it's funny because I played it in a few different of the releases, but I couldn't help but hum along with every single one. And I was like, oh, man, I really got to listen and just shut up so I can actually listen to the differences between these versions. But it's a great track. We'll talk about the sound hardware in just a second here, but the percussion, it kind of has a little splatty sound to it.
Yeah.
However, I think that with what they had, they did a really, really good job in the percussion line. It does kind of keep everything moving forward, and you get this really nice kind of like almost rock drum set feeling to a lot of the tracks. I like that.
Yeah, and I think we're going to go over that in just a little bit, but there's a reason why the sound comes out the way that it does on the MSX, but I think they did a really good job with what they had for sure.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about the MSX a little bit first. So the MSX Turbo, this is actually released not for the MSX that a lot of people are familiar with. It's kind of like an updated version. So the original MSX was released in 1983 and started, I wouldn't say dying out, it was still quite popular, but usage began declining around the late 80s. Panasonic, however, felt that the standard still had life left and produced a new machine with upgrades from the previous generations, the MSX2 Plus, called the MSX Turbo R. So only 2 models were made by Panasonic, one by Takaoka, until 1994, but it was a significant upgrade for those that had already kind of bought into the ecosystem. It had a better processor, clocked at just over 7 MHz, compared to the Z80 at 3.5 MHz on the MSX2 Plus. 256K RAM as the baseline compared to the 64K RAM it had before. It came out with new software like MSX Basic, MSX Basic 4. A lot of titles just ran better in general in the system, not to mention took advantage of any additional hardware in the tricked out MSX2 machines.
Yeah, and this is pretty popular during the PC era. Why kill a standard when something's going along so well? Just have an upgrade, some more RAM, some better graphics, all that sort of stuff. I mean, this is very common in every PC system. Right,
and there was still some trade-offs. Like I'm sure they had more grand plans for it, and they just were like, well, cost reasons or time, or, whatever budget. And they were just like, okay, we'll just stick this stuff in there instead. Now, there weren't a lot of games that took advantage of the hardware, but that makes sense given its time frame. It's just like, already almost the mid 90s, right? And so we didn't really see anything moving forward as far as software wise either, unless you talk about like the homebrew or demo scene, right?
Sure, yeah. And that's pretty common when you're doing an upgrade just a few years before the standard kind of changes a little bit.
Oh, we got a whole episode lined up for the end of the line systems, I think.
Oh, yeah, totally.
I
I personally, everybody knows I'm a big fan of the OPL3 chip and on PCs, and there was like 5 games. Took advantage of it. Still sounds great, but just it was like everybody was onto CD audio by that point, so there was really no reason for using it.
For using the hardware at all.
Yeah. It's just too bad. But, we actually have a similar situation here.
Right. So the sound system. So the sound system in the MSX Turbo R is actually pretty awesome. Given what it has, it's pretty awesome. Along with the previous models, the Turbo has the AY38910 for PSG. It included the MSX Music module for FM, and also had options for MSX MIDI. One of the Panasonic machines had a built-in interface for MIDI, as well as an option for MSX Audio, which had a built-in OPL1 chip inside.
So the MSX had a ton of different audio configurations, but we're just going to focus on Illusion City, which uses the MSX Music standard.
Yeah, we'd be here all day if we started going through all the different configurations.
Oh, yeah, I think there's like 4 or 5 at least. And so this one is the second standard for FM sound on the MSX, starting in 1987 using what was called the FM Pack, a proprietary expansion module from Panasonic. At its heart was the YM2413 or the OPLL, which is a low-cost budget chip based on the YM3812 or the OPL2 chip, hence OPL Lite. That's, OPLL.
Yeah. So the YM2413 or the OPLL had 2 modes. There was 9 full channels or voices of FM simultaneously that you could play, or 6 melodic tones plus 5 rhythm sounds at a given time. So we were talking about the drum having this kind of almost splatty kind of pre-configured drums. That's what you get. You get those 5 extra channels of just rhythm sounds. There are 2 types of waveforms. The OPL1 only had 1 type. So even though this seems very limiting, which it is, it's still leaps and bounds over what the OPL1 could do in terms of different waveforms and different sound that you can make. It has a built-in DAC, built-in instrument data for easy peasy FM tunes. And what I mean by built-in instrument data is there's 15 instrument settings hard-coded into the ROM that can't be modified. This is a huge limitation of the chip, and reason why it was so cost effective, or so cheap, I guess.
Yeah.
It shows kind of this huge limitation, since a composer really can only use one user-created patch or FM patch at a given time. Of course, they can use the same patch on multiple channels, but only one user-defined instrument can be played at a given time.
Now, while that does sound a little bit limited, and it certainly is, one advantage is it allowed composers who weren't as familiar with FM sounds to create things that sounded pretty good right out of the gate, instead of having to chase down creating your own patches and everything. So it isn't, at the time, it did make sense to release a chip like this.
Right. And another huge caveat was that MSX Music wasn't compatible with MSX Audio. So
that must have been really confusing back in the day. Somebody comes home with something and it says, this won't play on my computer. I don't know what's going on.
And I know. And MSX Music and Audio, the names are so close.
I know. I would have made that mistake.
Oh, God. What a nightmare for developers too. If you're new to the system and you're like, okay, we got this. So what is this? FM? Okay, music. Gotcha. And then they put it out and they're like, no, wait a minute. This was for MSX Audio.
Yeah, only about a third of the computers can use that one. Oh, damn it.
Yeah, the OPLL was used in a lot of other systems though. There was the NES with the VRC7, the FM chip for the Master System FM add-on. There was also a lot of low-cost keyboards in the late 80s and early 90s, like the PSS and the PSR series.
Yeah, if you had one of those keyboards with some teal buttons on it and it sounded kind of tinny and cheap, that was probably this. I had one. It was great. It was awesome.
Yeah, there was a bunch of arcade games that actually used it too, or a few, and it was kind of just sprinkled throughout some of the old kind of historia of computer games and all, the arcade scene and stuff.
The OPLL and the OPL1 didn't get used a lot on their own. In general, they were kind of paired with other sounds, so you don't really hear them talked about as much as even OPL2, which is the PC standard for a long time.
Well, why don't we do a quick little breakdown actually of some of these tracks? So that last track we played, I think that might be a good example of the Noises of the City. So why don't we go ahead and just listen to the PSG by itself in this situation, and then we'll kind of look at that OPLL chip.
I'm into it.
All right, so here is just the PSG by itself. All right, so in this track, we actually have that second mode that we were talking about earlier, where it's the 6 channels of FM and then the 5 channels of rhythm. But we can kind of hear how it's used. So let's go ahead and just take off the rhythm section real quick, and we'll just listen to that FM by itself.
Well, without the percussion, it just sounds pretty empty, honestly.
Right. I mean, and they really do have a lot to work with here, compared to other systems that we're going to hear from later on. The OPLL, it's not a bad chip. It really isn't. I mean, yeah, we talked about these limitations, but if you listen to these patches, they sound incredible, I think, which isn't necessarily the case for some of the other, situations where the OPLL was used, like, for example, the Master System.
Yeah, that's... There are a lot of reasons for that.
Yeah. But let's go ahead and turn on just the percussion line here. This is actually kind of basic, We have 5 different tones that we can do with the rhythm section, yet really only 2 are being used, right? It's the
kick and the snare,
kick and the snare, yeah. Why? And I think this is the reason, is because when we listened to the PSG a little while ago, we had that cymbal on that 3rd channel of the PSG. Let's add that in and see how the kind of percussion line fills out. So here's that extra channel of PSG. It's almost like a splash.
Oh yeah, they're using that pitch percussion. Pretty good effect there.
Yeah. Wow, that's pretty cool. Actually, I didn't know that it was PSG that was doing the tone there.
Wouldn't have guessed.
Yeah. Cool. All right, so that is the YM2413 with this track kind of broken down. We didn't get into each of the channels because really, again, it's just FM, like, your standard OPLL FM patch, which is either a sine wave or a half sine wave,
rectified sine. So basically the first half of the sine wave and the rest is just flat.
Yep. And then your percussion sounds, which we didn't really get a great example. Maybe later on in some of the other tracks, we'll hear a little bit more and we'll be able to listen to those and solo them out. But that being said, let's go ahead and get into our next track. This is actually a kind of a jump away from the MSX for a second. We're going to listen to the PC98 version. And this is going to be cool because this is actually a hardware recording from my PC98. So I think you guys are going to like it. And I think this track is pretty incredible, even on the limited 2203, which we'll be talking about in a second.
Yeah, it's quite different, but it actually sounds great. This is Crisis Area, composed by Tadahiro Nitta.
All right, that was the PC98 version of Crisis Area, composed by Tadahiro Nitta.
You know, it's a little bit faster than the other version, and it has the same sort of feel, but it really comes across just a little bit differently. I like it a lot.
Yeah, that low sustain FM just cuts through my heart. I love it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It sounds almost a little buzzier, a little bit more like almost sawtoothy there. There's some...
Oh, definitely. Yeah. And I think the reason why I wanted to listen to this version is because I really like that low note on the PC98. I think just the sound chip handles those sounds just so much better, to be honest. Now, let's talk about the PC98 version a little bit, because I think the graphics are slightly better, actually a lot better.
Yeah.
The music itself, though, the reason why we're not, showcasing the PC98 more is because it's only using some of the earlier model, like the built-in 2203, which only has 3 channels of FM and 3 PSG. So it's not as full, it's not as rich as the OPLL in that sense, in the sense of the amount of channels, I guess,
Yeah. It really sounds like they focused on the MSX version as kind of the core one, and the other ones were more just ports. They didn't really do a whole lot to take full advantage of all of the hardware configurations.
Right. It's almost like an afterthought, I think, a lot of the time. Now, the PC98 did, I want to say, get maybe a little more attention, because the way that they use like the PSG and the way that they use some of the FM, really kind of concentrating on creating rich kind of patches with the 4-op, that you get with the 2203. But the other versions, and we'll be listening to a few little samples from other stuff here and there, it just didn't really get the same amount of due diligence, I think. They're, like the YM2151 on the Sharp X68000, the soundtrack is just so-so.
And there are some tracks on the PC98 version that sound great, but on average, I think I prefer the MSX version, because it was clear that they spent the most time there anyway.
Right. Do you want to listen to a little bit of the MSX version so we can kind of compare the two? Maybe?
Yeah, I think so. It might be good to play a little bit of the PC98 version and then play the other one first, just so we can get it in your ear.
Oh, let's just fade back into the PC98 here.
Sure. Yeah, sounds good.
All right, so here's Crisis Area on the MSX. So I think that low note is a little more like fuzzy. It's a little less clean, more distorted at the higher levels.
Yeah, the bass is a little bit better on the PC98 version, but man, the MSX one is so crunchy. I love it.
It is really good. Like it was a toss up, where it was like, we got to throw in some PC98 stuff in here. But I do like the track, and the soundtrack. Either way you listen to it is going to be good. It's not a any version you listen to isn't going to be a crappy version.
Yeah, I don't think there's any that are outright bad. It's definitely a matter of what you had at the time, or if you're listening to it now, the MSX is definitely great. But it's interesting because it's actually kind of hard to find some of the other versions, so this is an opportunity for us to showcase some of that stuff.
Right. So let's listen to a track called "The Shop," which is where you go buy your stuff, and then after we listen to that, we'll kind of listen to each version that came out and kind of compare. Now, this is a track that did have maybe the most significant changes when I listened to them side by side. So this is The Shop, and we'll start with the MSX, and then we'll come back and we'll talk about the other ones.
Sounds good. That was Shop, composed by Tadahiro Nitta for Illusion City on the MSX.
This is such a funny track, dude. So it's all over the place, man. It's very strange.
When I first heard it, I'm like, oh my god, is this like a...
Is this broken?
Yeah, well, it sounds like it's one of these, combat zones, and then like a little bit later it just starts getting these kind of goofy instruments. It's like, no, it's probably a little bit more laid back in here.
Yeah, it's a very strange track, but I think that's what makes the difference between all the versions really interesting to listen to, because they all have their own little take on the kind of quirks that this track kind of brings out, right? So that was the MSX version. Let's go ahead and listen to the same track, but on the Mega CD. And this is actually using the 2612. This isn't using any Redbook audio or anything like that. So we can actually hear a really good comparison with another similar OPN family chip, right?
Right.
Yeah.
What is even going on there?
It's kind of a crappy version, I gotta say.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, whatever. Now, so the same chip, right? The game was ported over to the FM Towns, right? So this is also using the 2612, different clock, but we're gonna get a similar sound with this one. This is actually quite different. So let's take a listen. This is the Shop on the FM Towns. That's a pretty cool version, right?
It's pretty close to the spirit of it. I mean, it's definitely a different sound, but it works.
It sounds like it's like half the speed, too, for some reason. Maybe it's just I don't know, maybe it's just how it sounds. Maybe it's just coming out to me that way. Let's see what. So we had the 2612. Let's go ahead and jump over to the PC98 for a second. This is a little bit different on the 2203. So let's take a listen to that.
That's a really effective little tune there.
I like that version a lot. In fact, I played the game. So you played mostly on the MSX, right?
Pretty much, yeah.
I played the game entirely on the PC98 on my PC98, and so that's the one I'm most familiar with. But either way, so far it's been pretty good, except for that Mega CD version.
Yeah, I mean, it's clear that this is the port right after the first one that got the most attention, the PC98 version.
Right. So even more interesting here is. And not in a bad way, is the X68000 version on the 2151. So let's take a listen to that real quick. Again, just very different.
Whoa.
Yeah.
This is 2151?
Yeah. That's pretty rad, huh?
I think I have to take back what I said. I really didn't listen to this version at all, but it sounds like they put a lot of time into that too. Like, it's got some really interesting panning effects, and the patches are pretty cool.
Yeah, no, they really are. And, it's not just the 2150 one. It's also using the Oki chip for the PCM samples. So a little bit of a cheat there because it's got some extra, some beef behind it.
But they didn't have to use it. I mean, they could have just kind of cheaped out.
Yeah, and just gone
poured it straight over and not worry about it. But no, that definitely sounded really robust.
Now, I listened to the soundtrack in its entirety on the X68000. I gotta say, this is one of the tracks that actually sounds the best, actually, I gotta say. So, no, the soundtrack is really good. Like we're saying in the beginning of the show, either way you listen to it, it's a lot of fun. And we invite you guys to explore these other soundtracks. We're not going to play everything today because there's a ton of music in this game.
So much.
Yeah, so, if you like what you're hearing on the Sharp, go ahead and listen to that. Stuff's all over YouTube, all over the place. So definitely check it out. And so let's listen to actually the last version. We have, one more version here. So in each of the versions that the game was released on that actually make use or can use the MIDI sound, there is a MIDI soundtrack included. So like, let's say you fire up the MSX version, you have the option right in the beginning to choose either FM or MIDI. Same thing for the PC98 and also the Sharp X68000. So let's take a listen right now. And the MIDI is, I believe, is the same across the board.
I think so, yeah.
Right. And so this is from the PC98 version because that's what I got. So we'll take a listen to that, and you can see that MT32 for a second.
Wow.
It's the fartiest bass I've ever heard. Some really interesting instruments in there.
Some really interesting sound choices. Parts of it sound really good, and other parts I'm like, what was the point of that?
Yeah, I got to say, the MT32 does not do this soundtrack justice at all. I listened to the soundtrack totally on the MT32, and I was just like, oh god. There is some really interesting uses, and there's some good tracks, don't get me wrong. It's just compared to the FM stuff that we're hearing, it just doesn't hold its weight, I think.
Yeah, no, I definitely prefer the FM stuff.
Yeah. So let's talk about this gameplay a little bit. We haven't really talked about it yet, and we're already, an hour deep into the episode. So Illusion City is described by Microcabin as a cyberpunk hyper fantasy RPG. And they really like to kind of showcase the hyper fantasy because that just makes things sound cooler, I guess. Anyways, it takes place. Yeah, I don't know.
Everything's got to be hyper or mega or whatever.
Or X. Anyways, it takes place solely in several different districts of Neo Hong Kong. And as you talk and kind of interact with people living or working there and explore more of the surroundings, the story begins to kind of unfold, including the mystery surrounding the Siva Corporation and the demons that now kind of inhabit the city.
Yeah, the aesthetic is a mix between Shadowrun and Blade Runner, with Tianren even wearing a long brown trench coat, reminiscent of Blade Runner, of course.
Right. And the game is a top-down view with kind of like this angle to it. So if you're familiar with you know what? Actually, this reminds me a lot of Syndicate. Did you ever play Syndicate?
Just a little bit, yeah, back in the day, but I haven't played it in like 20-something years.
I think I originally played it on an old Apple computer. It's like a Macintosh 68K or something like that. And I remember loving the game. That's a cyberpunk fantasy world too. And I think now that I'm thinking about it, oh my God, it's actually there's a lot of similarities there. Even the way you move around with your characters. Your party can consist of 3 different people, and they kind of drop in and drop out depending on the current part of the story. And we were talking about this earlier. As the story unfolds, certain characters will be introduced. They'll join you for a little while, and maybe those characters won't come back for several hours of the game or something, and then you'll see them again, and they'll be like leveled up with you. Yeah.
If you've played Final Fantasy IV, some of the older JRPGs, you'll have kind of a revolving door cast. Some people come back, some people don't, but there's kind of some of your main party members that stick around. Tianren is always in the party, and that sort of thing.
Yeah, and as you play, you learn new arts or different magic for your characters, as well as the traditional things like experience and stat improvements. NPCs will also give you different missions and lead you to different hostile areas. So one NPC might say, "Oh, check out this environment or this tower," and send you over on this kind of wild goose chase. But as you go through these, which seem like side missions, it kind of does unravel the story. And each of these kind of side missions are very important to kind of progress as you get through the game.
Yeah, and a lot of the early missions start off with you meeting with your master Lao Shi or receiving intel about your next destination from the local nightclub. You'll often have to go there and meet with the club owner in this sort of backroom VIP area. She'll give you some intel about who your next target is or where you need to go to find more information, or meeting with the Rebel Alliance, that kind of thing, people that are also fighting for the same cause. And you'll get access to more of the city during each of these kind of key moments.
Right. So I think in the beginning, a lot of things are kind of barred off. There's some barriers and stuff. And, it's just their way of kind of keeping you contained in the beginning. But as the story kind of progresses, it'll open up new parts of the city. You can go underground and ride this kind of futuristic cab around, which is pretty sweet. And, like a hover cab, Back to the Future style. Yeah,
you'll go to laboratories and construction sites and lots of different areas. So instead of being a linear game, you start in sort of this hub area and you can go to other parts of the city, and each of those might have a few areas you can go off to. So, it's a pretty interesting structure, especially for 91.
Right. And we were talking as we were kind of playing it through, and you're like, "Oh, I just got to this area over here." And I was like, "That was the first area I went." And you're like, "Oh, now I'm in the West Wing." I'm like, "I haven't even got there yet."
Yeah.
And we're totally different parts of the game. So there is some exploration, right? It's not just linear.
You do end up going back and forth to the town, and you do revisit some of the same areas, especially in that central hub where you start off near your home. And that's an area you come back to quite a lot.
Right. But there is a very good storytelling aspect, even though it sounds like it's a little bit open and kind of free roaming. They do kind of bring you back in and centralize you around all these different parts and different themes to keep the story moving. For example, there's this religious group throughout the city who's kind of tied in some way to Siva, and you kind of learn about them, and there's different messages being kind of sent around through different inhabitants, and all things kind of tie together towards midway through the game, and then the story even more expands upon itself.
Yeah, exactly.
It's pretty intense.
When I was playing through, I didn't feel like I was having trouble finding where the next area to go was. You were free to explore, but it wasn't okay, well, I don't know what's next. You're not railroaded, but I found that the narrative does a good job of guiding you to the next area, so you kind of are always making forward progress.
Right. Well, there was a few times where I was totally lost, but that was my own fault. So
I definitely had that experience, but it's partially the time, and an NPC can only say so many things, right?
Right. And like we're saying, getting around the town, you're barred off from a lot of different areas, but as you get more badge access to other areas, even begin to unfold even more. So this game just keeps kind of building upon itself and building upon itself.
More and more access.
Right.
Yeah, so that's the general structure of the game. And before we talk too much about the battle system itself, why don't we actually play the sort of standard battle theme?
Yes. So there is a few different battles in the game. Each one has kind of their own music tied to it, especially when you're doing a boss or something like that. The standard battle music is composed by Yasufumi Fukuda, and it's pretty fantastic. So let's take a listen to that. We'll be back, and we'll talk about the battle system as well. All right, that was the battle track composed by Yasufumi Fukuda for the MSX Turbo R version of Illusion City. Wow, dude, this is so good.
It's, it better be, because, a battle theme, you're going to be listening to it over and over. And it's a short loop, but it's got a lot of parts. It's really high energy. It's a great track.
Very high intensity. In fact, I almost think it's too much intensity for every single time you're going to get into this battle. But, I wouldn't have them change it for anything. It's very good. It's a very good track.
They pretty much only get crazier from there. Honestly, that's like the
most mellow one.
I know.
Yeah, very good. A lot of soaring kind of theme, very thematic, very awesome high end. That whatever guitar. I don't even know what instrument that is. Kind of falling in. I love that. So good. All right, so the battle system here. It's a turn-based battle system with an over-the-shoulder view.
Yeah, but you see your entire body rather than just the top half. So it's very similar to Phantasy Star 2, but you might remember you only kind of see the top half of your torso and your head.
Right. There's a few different options here. So you can do your arts or your magic to attack. You can do a defense, so you can, kind of block yourself against bad guys. Depending on how many characters you have in your party, you can have up to 3. So you can have one guy like blocking, the other guy doing the more offensive attacks and stuff like that. You can, your party can flee. Oh, that's
of course. Yeah. I mean, it's a standard JRPG. And your main character, Tianren, actually uses guns, so he can use different types of bullets throughout the battle. So, if an enemy is either weak to something or you run out, for example, because you buy them in like limited quantities, like I think 100 or 200 at a time.
Right.
So you have some options there. And the arts are obviously anywhere from offensive or defensive spells or status or the usual sort of things.
The usual stuff. Yeah. There's not really anything to take away from this other than it's a very standard JRPG turn-based battle system. You can use items and stuff like that as well. The difference between the different versions, actually, for example, the MSX version has a kind of rudimentary battle screen, I guess. You can see your character stats, but everything is just kind of text-based and it's kind of squished together, whereas the PC98 version has
it's a little bit more of a UI, actually.
Yeah, it has an actual UI. It's the same UI, actually, that you would get if you're walking around town. So it's got your character stats kind of all prettified on one side, and then you got your different options on the other side. And it kind of is more of a coherent thing with the text of what's going on. You deal 8 damage to this bad guy and whatever. The X68000 version has a little bit better resolution than the PC98 and PC88 versions, but it's funny because it's really just a bigger bezel. It's the exact same version, but it's just a bigger bezel. So not really too much to talk about there.
I think they really wanted to do that from the beginning, because when you're walking around just normal, not in battle mode, you have those things on the right side which lists your out of battle commands, and on the left it has your status, or it's reversed. I can't remember.
Right.
So the later versions just had, well, why don't we just use that in the battle instead of creating this all new combat UI?
I'm sure that's exactly what they wanted to do, and it might have been a thing where they had too many sprites on the screen for the MSX and just really couldn't handle it that well. I'm not sure, but it's a very distinctive difference between the two versions in the battle mode. However, it plays exactly the same, so either way you play it, you're going to get the same experience, I think.
So for those of you who've played games like Earthbound, you'll probably recognize this, or Chrono Trigger. The enemies actually show up as you're walking around. It's not random battles in the sense of you just walk 7 steps.
Right.
You can actually avoid the enemies, of course. Later on in the game, you're in narrow corridors, and it's a little bit harder to avoid enemies.
I was just going to bring that up, because I was in the tower, and there's these robots that run around, and I couldn't for the life of me get away from them.
Yeah,
they're too fast. They're too fast.
I mean, it's sort of a bit of an illusion of choice, but at least in some of the easier places,
illusion city of choice.
Oh, come on.
Sorry,
but yeah, that's actually a problem in a lot of those games. But it's nice that you can at least sometimes have the option to avoid the battles.
Right.
Yeah, pretty standard stuff.
Let's get into our next track. This is a track called Cavern, which is another kind of dungeon-esque level.
Sort of like a sewer area, if I'm remembering correctly.
Right. And this was composed by Yasufumi Fukuda again. So let's take a listen to that, and we'll be right back.
That was Cavern, composed by Yasufumi Fukuda for Illusion City on the MSX.
This track is another just excellent track because you're almost running from something, or you're trying not to be discovered by something.
It's a bit stealthy, a little.
Yeah. So it's got these kind of almost piston-y sounding FM patches, I think. And what this kind of reminds me of, actually, there's a Lunar track that has some I think it's the PlayStation version, maybe has this similar kind of like piston sound to it. And it reminds me of that track a lot. And I know it's totally unrelated, and that game came out, whenever, but it's just I like that kind of sound because it does give me this. You're kind of creeping around. You're trying not to be found.
Yeah, and this goes back to what I was saying earlier. This is another one of those walking around combat zones. You're not actually in a battle, but it has that sort of like, oh, there's enemies around, I got to be careful. I think it really sells the scene. And, just like indoor combat in some of these earlier tracks, I think it just really is very effective at, setting the scene of danger.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, and, for what it's worth, too, I think that, even with the limited sound, they were able to really create this atmospheric world that does have this cyber kind of...
It's very metallic, but not in that sort of like, cheap FM sounds, but it's kind of like...
There you go.
Yeah, it just sort of... It has this very noisy, crunchy, gritty, metallic kind of...
Like it's like a place you don't want to be,
but it is,
like,
yeah.
But it at the same time is very inviting.
It's the future. It's like it's a place that's lived in. It's not just like a cave or it's like this is the city. It feels very, I don't know. It sounds like the city to me.
Yeah, totally. Yeah,
the whole soundtrack just feels like you're in, like a consistent place.
Yeah,
really.
a very like a breathing, living city. Yeah. So let's get into our next track. This is fantastic. This is actually probably one of my favorite tracks. It's called Hachibushu Battle, and it's composed by Yukiharu Urita for the MSX Turbo R. right, that was the Hachibushu Battle, composed by Yukiharu Urita for the MSX version of Illusion City.
What a track.
Oh, man.
I mean, it starts off just as an arrangement of the regular battle theme, and then it just has this like sense of determination to it. It's so focused, and
it's like that first battle track. was a lot of energy, but it was like contained in the guy's trench coat. And all of a sudden, like the trench coat comes off and he's just like, wham, it's just a lot of energy. And again, this is the OPLL. This really just sells it.
This game really lets the sound shine. And just to give a little bit of context, the Hachibushu Battle is the theme of the main bosses. Pretty much every time you get to one of these 8 main bosses, which Hachibushu means the clan of 8, right?
Right.
So, you know, right from the very beginning of the game, like a few minutes in, you know that your task is to defeat these guys progressively, you know, just take them down one by one.
The 8 different pieces of the Triforce.
Basically.
Yeah.
And so every time you get to these guys, it's usually at the end of a long dungeon. They'll have some sort of exposition. You've been introduced to them once or twice. And so there's been a bit of a build-up in terms of, you know, like think of how Dragon Ball Z or whatever, one of these shows or whatever will handle it. It's not just some random enemy. This is somebody that you know and you have to fight and is in your way, and they're just standing there waiting for you to take them on.
Right. That's a good way to put it. It's like each one of these boss battles is like an episode of Dragon Ball Z.
Yeah, pretty much. And you know what's something that's really cool about this game is I didn't play through all of it, but I did watch through most of a playthrough of it. There are these sort of intermediate scenes where they actually talk about the backstories of these characters. Like some of them have relationships with each other. Some of them aren't necessarily fighting because they want to be. You know, there's like this, it's not just like, oh, I'm evil, defeat me and go on to the next guy. There's a bit of nuance to these characters and they are developed. And, you know, for a game in 91, they don't necessarily even have to do that. I mean, how many games do you have where the bosses are all just like, you know, oh, I'm a giant dragon, whatever.
Yeah.
You know, so I thought that was a really nice, feature of the game.
And it's just like this constant arc of the story through the progression of these 8 different bosses. And I think that is what sells the game. It's actually really fun. It's fun to go through. And it's too bad because this game never had an official English translation.
It sounds like there were plans for it because I've seen some sort of unofficial translated titles that sound like that's what it would have been called if it had been released in the US, but or in English in general. So
Right. However, what has been released is the soundtracks. And so I do want to make sure we mention this. Egg Music went ahead and released the soundtracks a few years back. They did the MSX version. It's called the MSX Remastered soundtrack, which is about $20 US. And then they did the PC98 soundtrack, which not only includes the FM, but includes the MT32 stuff. And this is still the same price, $20. Really, if you guys can and you have a means, purchase these soundtracks. They're incredible, and they're remastered in the sense that they've gone through the soundtracks and recorded from hardware and gotten the best tone that they could from those systems. And I think that is what makes this version or these soundtracks, these releases shine. So definitely check those out. We'll have them in the show notes.
2 things before we go on. One, I really want to just say we're not getting paid by Egg Music. They go through great pains to...
Wouldn't that be nice?
Yeah, I know, but they really, really do a great job of doing the conversions of all of these soundtracks. And it's, you know, it's not... It takes time to get all of this stuff together. And, you know, I mentioned on the Manabu Saito episode that they got pretty much his entire back catalog. And, you know, they were a huge help in my research, and they just do a fantastic job.
Right. And a big shout out to Haley because he drives a lot of some of these chip re-releases out. I don't know if he did this one specifically, but he's very involved in Egg Music and stuff like that. So...
And the last thing I wanted to mention is Google sometimes translates Hachibushu as 8 basketball, so clearly the links between Barclay RPG, you know, it's becoming more and more apparent to me.
Nice. Okay, so moving on. Let's get to our next track. This is called Home, composed by Yasufumi Fukuda again for the MSX. Let's take a listen.
That was Home, composed by Yasufumi Fukuda for the MSX version of Illusion City.
So at this point in the episode, you know, we're pretty deep, but we've only been playing a lot of the more lively, upbeat tracks. There's a whole other side to the soundtrack, a very delicate side, and these tracks, some of these more mellow ones, are equally as impressive. I mean, the sounds that we're getting, they have such great harmony together, and they just sound so good. And I really think that even the lighter side of the soundtrack is just as good as it gets.
All of the music, I think, carries a lot of emotion and expression into it. This just happens to be a little bit more either melancholy or just mellow.
Maybe safe, too.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, this plays right when you start the game, you're sitting in your apartment. This is the music at home. And you come back to this area quite often. This is where you save and, you know, rest up. And it just is one of, like, I feel safe when I listen to this music. It's just very welcoming and nostalgic almost, like in a sense.
It's like homecoming, right?
Yeah.
It's got that, you know, this is where you're going to go back, you know, you're going to go visit your parents' house for Christmas. It's the house you grew up in, and it feels like that to me,
exactly.
You know?
And it's just such it's not a delicate track, but it definitely is a lot more restrained than some of the other music. And I really enjoy this one a lot.
Right. So let's get into our next track, and this is another one that's really important to me. I love this track. I think it sounds so good. We're going to take a little bit of a departure for the MSX and play the PC98 version. It's called Requiem. This is composed by Yukiharu Urita, and I just think this version shines. So let's take a listen to Requiem from Illusion City.
That was the PC98 version of Requiem, composed by Yukiharu Urita for Illusion City.
Yeah, wow.
I know, just like
this is
yearning, longing, sadness, loss, like that song just totally captures those feelings of just deep, painful emotions.
Right. This track, like, I close my eyes and I just kind of get taken away to a different place. It's just a very touching, heartfelt track. And I feel that the FM, those piano keys, sound so good. It really, I would love to see somebody perform this on the piano. I think it would be incredible.
It would sound great. And the fact that the track is like not afraid to get quiet in the second half, to just like give you that room to just like reflect
and breathe. Yeah.
So effective.
Yeah. Excellent track. So at this point, we've kind of mentioned the graphics a little bit, but let's talk about them just briefly. I think that on the MSX, this game is spectacular looking. And I think the same goes for all the ports. It looks really, really good. It's very well done. The cutscenes in the intro, just
You got to watch them.
Yeah, you got to watch them. It's incredible. The animation and the hand-drawn art in this is just so beautiful. It's really good, and I was surprised. Like I like the MSX. I really, really do. I think it's an excellent system. But when I first saw this, I was like, holy crap. Like, I haven't seen the MSX, yet.
Yeah.
This is really good. And the PC 98 version with a little bit higher resolution and the Sharp X68000 version just hit it home. It just looks incredible.
Yeah, if you have a soft spot for that sort of late 80s, early 90s cyberpunk art style, like, this game just does it right.
Right.
It's so yeah, like the still frames where they have just fully drawn out art look beautiful. Right.
The animation is incredible. So, like, just to give you an example, like in the beginning of the game, your character the one of the main characters, I can't remember which one, like kind of moves around on a chair, kind of circles around.
Yeah.
Just the animation there, like I was like, wow, that looks so good. Your character putting on his trench coat or sitting down on the reclining on
you're sitting there smoking a cigarette and like the little puffs of smoke are billowing up.
It's really good. It's really good. Now, that being said, the walking frame rate sucks. I don't know what it is. Every single version of the game, the walking frame rate is like atrocious.
It's like block by block. It's not really continuous, and it's kind of a little bit strange to get used to. But
right. They really touted this thing that they were developing originally for the ZAC series. It's called the VR system, but they updated it for Illusion City. It's called the Visual Representation System, and it's used for the player's viewpoint. It was quite a feat at the time. It's a 2.5D perspective on your characters with kind of a cross section of the buildings and structures that they're in. This might seem like kind of every other game now, but at the time it was kind of impressive, and it was very groundbreaking on the MSX. I think they had this multi-scrolling support.
Yeah.
So like if you're in the tower, I remember being very impressed by walking through this tower in this building and seeing through the windows to the cityscape and seeing that kind of
the parallax effect.
Yeah, really, really cool in the MSX. A lot higher detail of objects and animations, kind of compared to the earlier ZAC titles. So they really kind of honed in this VR system for Illusion City, and I think make this game kind of a spectacular experience for MSX owners, right?
Yeah, there were a couple of things that I wanted to mention from the battle scenes because, on the topic of the graphics, there was this one battle towards the middle of the game where you're fighting this one of the clan of 8, and he shapeshifts into a Black Panther, and he's walking back and forth across the screen.
Oh,
and like,
right.
Today, it's like, that's no big deal, but you got to remember, back in the day, everything was just like, here's a sprite, here it sits like on the left corner of the map.
Here's the coordinates, and it's going to wink at you or something.
Yeah,
that's
exactly.
It. That's all you got.
And so it was really cool to see that, like the entire battle playfield is being manipulated, and you have these things that are moving across and, like attacking side to side. It's just like, I don't know, like, I wouldn't say I'm like super easily impressed, but I thought that was a really neat trick.
Right.
And there are some other kind of interesting perspective tricks. There's this other boss, another clan of 8, where you're fighting this guy and he has 2 robots on either side. One of them is so tall, like half of his body is cut off. You're just like looking at his legs and you're like, whoa, I'm fighting this giant robot that's going to just pound me into the ground.
Yeah.
So, they did a lot of really interesting things with the battle scenes that I wouldn't have expected.
And same thing as some of the dialogue scenes taking place in like the home or something like that. They're using that 2.5D perspective in a kind of interesting way, right? So they don't just have the characters kind of straight lined up, right?
Yeah.
They'll have like 2 sofas with a table, and they're kind of angled to where it almost looks like everything's in a triangle. But if you think about the perspective, everything kind of works like that, and it allows you to see the characters kind of lounging and being kind of in their element rather than just, this sideways looking sprite, I guess.
I know this is going to sound ridiculous, but I swear, watch all of the sitting animations. Like, everybody has their own animation and posture. Like, some people kind of sit with their legs spread apart. Others are, a little bit more tucked in. You got a character that looks just like Old Snake from Metal Gear Solid 4 he's a cyborg. He sits on the side, like against the couch on the back of it. It's just like so much loving attention and detail to something that almost every other game would pretty much never even bother with.
Right. Even games that came out way after it. So
yeah.
Props to the programmers and the artists, because they really hit this one out of the park.
Absolutely.
All right, so let's get into our next track. This is titled Illusion Castle, composed by Tadahiro Nitta. All right, that was Illusion Castle, composed by Tadahiro Nitta for the MSX version of Illusion City. Con gusto.
Oh man, that track just has this air of like
Dominance,
inevitability. Like you're like it's so slow. It's like you're walking towards something at the end of the room, and you know, like you don't want to go there, like, you know, the guillotine or something ridiculous. It has that feel to it, and it's kind of like sad on the bad guy's behalf, because Illusion Castle, you see cutscenes in it pretty early on in the game. You don't get there until pretty late, but anytime there's one of these cutscenes where the bad guys are talking amongst themselves, this will play when they're in the castle. And, you know, it's like, you know, it's a video game. You know what's going to happen. You're probably going to beat the bosses. You're going to
end up there at that one, at one point, yeah.
But it's like, it's such an interesting, it's not like an evil or dark. It's like a very, I don't know, it's just a very heavy track.
Right. So let's keep the momentum going. We're going to get into Matenno Battle. And this was composed by Yasufumi Fukuda.
That was Matenno Battle, composed by Yasufumi Fukuda for Illusion City.
This is my favorite track of the game. This is it. It's so goddamn amazing.
It's dramatic. It's epic. It's fitting of a not quite, but almost final battle.
Yeah, it's very, very good.
Yeah.
I mean, in each section, like just when you think, oh, they've already hit the climax, then it goes into that almost double time, and you get this really soaring, very sounding track. And
I think it stands up there with some of the really the better JRPG battle themes. If this were a popular game, this would end up on a lot of lists. I think it's a great theme.
Big time. I do want to talk about the PC98 version a little bit, because I want to say the MSX version is where it's at, but the PC98 version, because it really relies so heavily on the PSG, there's a lot stronger sense of harmony when you get to that soaring session. You want to hear just that part real quick?
Just a little bit, yeah, sure.
Yeah. So this is that part where it kind of breaks down and starts kind of flying around. I love this part. So you can see it's kind of like a little bit stronger. You can hear the harmony a lot better, at least.
Yeah, definitely. It's a little bit more distinct than the MSX version because there's, I don't want to say too much going on, but it's definitely a really dense track, so you don't get as much of that.
Right.
Just a real quick mention, since I didn't say it before, this is after you've defeated the 8 clan. This is like the big boss, the leader of the 8 clan, the 9th.
The big guy.
Yes.
Right. So we talked about a bunch of different versions, and we mentioned at the beginning of the show that AISYSTEM Tokyo did the port over to the Mega CD. And AISYSTEM Tokyo, they were established in May of 1989 as a subsidiary of AISYSTEM, mostly a porting house and programming subcontractor responsible for programming a lot of the following games. SMS port of Solomon's Key, a New Zealand story on the PC Engine, Hit the Ice from Mega Drive, Devilish, Rainbow Island Extra for the Mega Drive. In addition to the Illusion City Mega CD port, they also did Night Striker, the Ninja Warriors, G Darius, Puzzle Bobble 3, Darius Gaiden. So they've done a lot of stuff. It's not just like this, no-name group. So AISYSTEM Tokyo went bankrupt in 2005. But AISYSTEM still exists and continues to operate the GoNet online services and Salon. I guess they have...
I'm not that familiar with their
online
recent activities, honestly.
No idea. That was just what I got from their site. So.
But just as a quick sort of to round that out, the reason why we're bringing up AISYSTEM Tokyo is not just because they handled the port, but because the Mega CD actually has original tracks. Some of them are covers in sort of the Redbook audio, but there are a few tracks that were unique to the Sega Mega CD version. So we're actually going to be playing a few of those.
Yeah, so let's start with Theme A. And this was arranged by Hirokazu Oota, and we'll talk about him in a second. This is a very different take on Theme A, which we've heard before. It takes a little while to get going. So
a little bit expanded, yeah.
Yeah, let's take a listen. We'll be right back.
That was Theme A, composed by Tadahiro Nitta and arranged by Hirokazu Oota for Illusion City on the Mega CD.
Yeah. Now, it does take a while to get going. At first, I was listening. I was like, "Where? Are you sure this is theme A? This is like, where did they get?
It's more
this?
like sound design than it is like composition. You've got
Right.
some textural stuff, and it's like, yeah, and then it picks up, and then it's like, oh, I recognize this.
Right. I don't want to talk too much about the Mega CD stuff. I mean, we got 2 more tracks to go through, right? So let's go ahead and just jump right into our next track. This is the Hachibushu Battle. We've heard the MSX version already. This was composed by Yukiharu Urita and arranged by Fukuda for the Mega CD.
That was the Hachibushu Battle, composed by Yukiharu Urita and arranged by Yasufumi Fukuda for the Mega CD version of Illusion City.
Now, we talked about that, originally on the MSX sounding like an Ease track. This is definitely a later Ease track, completely redone, basically with the Illusion City theme,
pretty
on
much.
top of it.
Yeah, like if there's anything that has that sort of like rock sound that the Ease series is known for, I mean, this is it.
Yeah, this is excellent. This is a really good track, and I'm not too fond of a lot of the redbook audio in this, in kind of these rearrangements. But this is a killer one, so I'm glad we played that one.
We're bringing you the cream of the crop over here for sure. And there are some interesting choices, but some of them are just outright not great.
Yeah,
so,
like some of the horn sections in some of the tracks is awful.
Yeah.
You guys can experience that on your own. We'll leave it at that. Let's listen to our next track. This is the Matenno Battle, composed by Yukiharu Urita, and this was arranged by Yasufumi Fukuda, again for the Mega CD version of Illusion City. All right, so that was a completely original track. Basically, the Matenno Battle, redone for the Mega CD, composed originally by Yukiharu Urita, but this time arranged, almost completely redone, by Yasufumi Fukuda.
Yeah, it's pretty much, you hear the Illusion City kind of themes in there, but this is a new song.
Yeah,
so
totally.
It's pretty awesome.
It's really good, but it's a lot more regal than, almost like there's a march to it, like some kind of castle theme, which didn't get so much in the original version.
No, I mean, you have that more metallic industrial kind of sound on the FM chips, and I think this works well for the sound they were going for, a little bit more orchestral. So I think it's a pretty effective track.
Yeah. So Hirokazu Oota, we mentioned him in that first track. He did a lot of the arrangements for the beginning and the ending But he did the MIDI arrangements for Zack 3 on the PC-98, Nanatsu Kaze no Shima Monogatari for the PlayStation, along with a business partner and co-composer Shinji Kinoshita in their production company called Buddy Zoo. Some of their PlayStation titles for Tomica, the toy company, there was a Purareru game, and I think there was like a...
Yeah, I don't know. Their credits weren't really as well known. Probably the biggest one is Dual Heroes for the N64, which I think came out here. So you may know that one. I'm not that familiar with the game.
I'm not familiar with the game at all. I guess he also composed some independent films.
Yeah, what I was able to find is there's these two sort of action Sentai sort of movies called Zeiram or Zeiramu, released in the early 90s, like 90, 91, something like that. So... and I was able to find that credit on their website. So I know they did the music for it.
Yeah, I just don't know much about those films. I mean, maybe they're really popular. I don't know.
I don't know. It sounds like they're more like cult B grade sort of things, but they looked entertaining.
A lot of the Sentai stuff.
Yeah.
The Mega CD version, yeah. So we were talking, it uses redbook audio, and that's what we were playing here. But it also uses the FM chip, which is interesting. And it's actually kind of jarring because if you're in battle, you get this really awesome redbook audio track.
Right.
But the victory tune that plays directly after you beat the enemies is FM.
Yeah.
And it has a very it's just jarring. It just doesn't sit very well.
And to be honest, like the arrangements on the Mega CD version, the FM arrangements, the YM2612 aren't the best version of this. So it's kind of
right.
It's a little bit of a strange soundtrack overall.
Yeah, the majority of the game uses the YM2612 and the PSG. So, and I think it's a lot of just the PC-98 patches as a base.
And I don't know how much modification they really did to get it to sound good. I think it was just sort of like, let's just get this out the door, and at least for the FM stuff.
And I think a lot of them worked, but our perspective, at least for mine, doesn't sit.
No, but I mean, it was the classic jump to CD audio. Let's give them something a little bit more... glamorous, glorious,
Right.
But, it's hard to go back to some of those tracks anyway.
Yeah. Well, let's go ahead and listen to our final battle track. This was composed by Yasufumi Fukuda again, and it's fantastic. So let's take a listen.
That was Final Battle, composed by Yasufumi Fukuda for Illusion City on the MSX.
Now, this version does start off a little bit kind of marchy, but then does kind of flourish like kind of halfway through and develops into this very awesome track. And I really like this. When I first heard it, I was just kind of like,
Yeah.
But man, it grows on you. It really does.
It's one of these tracks where, not to spoil too much of the game, but you've already defeated all the hardest bosses. Think like the last battle of Final Fantasy VII. You've already defeated the boss, and it's a one-on-one battle, and it's almost more just for the...
Yeah, this is your one-wing angel fight.
Well, no, it's the one after that, when Cloud is sort of in his consciousness, like fighting Sephiroth solo.
You're not spoiling Illusion City, but you're spoiling
okay. Should I tell you about what happens to Aeris?
No.
Another time. But... No, it's like you've gotten to the final hurdle. This is the epilogue. This is the denouement. Everything is kind of winding down. It's just you versus the last boss in a final duel, and you pretty much know how this goes.
Yeah, you know how this is gonna end. Very good track. I was really impressed especially after I heard it, several times, and I was like, oh man, this track really is quite incredible. It's quite the feat. They really nailed it with this one.
And a very different feel from a lot of the other battle themes, which I love how much contrast there is in the music. On a surface listen, it sounds very similar, but there's really 4 or 5 different kinds of characters that they're going for, and I think for the most part they were really effective.
Right. All right, so that about wraps up the show.
Quite a beast today.
Yeah, this is gonna be a long one, but there's a lot of music, man. We don't want to cut everything out, but we want to do it justice and play from the different versions and give you guys a real sense of the soundtrack and real appreciation for the audio and all the work that was put into it. So today we covered Illusion City on the MSX. We talked about the PC98 version and the other ports composed by Tadahiro Nitta, Yukiharu Urita, and Yasufumi Fukuda.
If you want more on the show, then check us out online at pixelatedaudio.com for show notes and the track list, or hang out with us on the Discord channel.
Yep, there's an active community, and there's a lot of people posting some great tracks, some great discussion to be had there. So join the Discord channel. You can find the link on the website, and let's chat game audio. Anyways, if you like the show and you want to leave a comment on this episode, that would be appreciated. If you want to give us a review on iTunes, that's awesome. Want to say thanks to everybody who's left reviews so far. We also have a Patreon. We do this show completely for nonprofit. All the donations that we do get go into kind of maintaining the show and getting equipment or, paying the website dues, all that stuff. But, we don't make any money on this, and we want to continue just supporting game audio and these awesome composers.
Right. We do this for the love of the music, but, it takes time and effort. We just want to make sure that we are able to continue doing this for as long as we can.
Yep. If you're new to the podcast, make sure you check out some of our past episodes. We recently did an episode with Dropsy and the composer. I did a solo episode last, which was Micromaniacs for the Game Boy Color. It was a very interesting, short episode. So if you need something quick on a short commute, take a listen to that one. It was episode 104. And what else we got, man? A whole bunch of stuff.
Well, you had an episode 82 with Iwadare, Lunar, and the Silver Star.
Oh, we mentioned that. Yeah,
man, that's a fantastic episode.
Take a listen to that. I was a big fan of Lunar, still am, and so that was a really fun episode. He had a lot of really cool information to talk about.
And this is kind of an interesting episode 56 and 57 are a paired episode of GG Alest and Alest with the second one is with Toshiaki Sakota. So
yeah,
really interesting pair of episodes covering some interesting shooter games with really great music.
Yeah. So the track taking us out, we got one more track. We talked about the kind of fanfare track, and so we're going to play that for you now. It's called Victory, and this was composed by Yukiharu Urita for the MSX. Thank you guys so much for listening, and we'll see you back in a few weeks for the next episode.